US interest rates keep falling after last week's soft jobs data, so gold jumps to a new record high. Japan's GDP is revised higher, and China's exports to the US fell 33% in August. That's coming up in our 5 Things in 5 Minutes on Tuesday, September the 9th. And then, in our deep dive interview, ANZ Pacific economist Kishti analyses the economic impact on Fiji of its rugby teams.
Both teams play a free-flowing style of rugby, which is quite pleasant to watch. Their admiration and international fan base will only grow in the future, in my view, and the Drua's team contribution to GDP will also grow as well.
But first, in 5 and 5 with ANZ, US bond yields kept falling overnight, helping to push gold prices to fresh record highs. Meanwhile, the market focused in Europe later this week will be on the European Central Bank's rates decision. Here's ANZ economist Bansi Madhavani overnight from London on why she sees the ECB holding on Thursday night.
The euro area economy is holding up well. If you look at indicators of demand, they have improved despite the baseline 15% tariffs on Europe's exports to US. We also see that the labor market is firm. While there's some sort of slowdown in hiring, unemployment rate has remained stable at record low levels. So we are positive on growth outlook, and in fact, we have revised our 2025 growth forecast to 1.3% from 1.2% before.
As of 4 a.m. Sydney Melbourne time, the S&P 500 was up 0.1% and the Nasdaq was up 0.5%. The yield on the 10-year US Treasury was down another 3 basis points to 4.05%. Gold was up 0.6% at $3,673 an ounce, just off another intraday record high of $3,685 an ounce. West Texas oil futures were up 0.8% at $62.35 US a barrel. The US dollar index down 0.3%. The Aussie dollar up 0.5% at 65.90 US cents, and the Kiwi up 0.8% at 59.38 US cents. Number 2. Bansi says the European Union's inflation situation will also encourage the ECB to hold.
Inflation, on the other hand, is well behaved, with both headline and core inflation sustainably around the 2% target. What's adding to our confidence on inflation outlook is the fact that wage growth has moderated and inflation expectations are anchored. In fact, we think risks are that inflation may fall below 2% in the coming quarters, and for 2026, we forecast the CPI inflation will average 1.6%. So we are expecting that the ECB will maintain an easing bias. We forecast one more rate cut later this year on the possibility that inflation may undershoot the target in the coming months.
Number 3. Markets are now on tenterhooks for US inflation data, also on Thursday night. Here's ANZ's Head of FX Research, Marja Benzaman.
We expect the US core CPI to rise by 0.29% month on month in August. That's a year-on-year level at 3.1%. Clearly, this uptick in inflation is expected because you're going to see tariff-related cost pressures come through. What all this means for the dollar? Look, I think when we look at Fed rate cuts pricing at the moment, it's really priced extremely dovish. And, I think the markets are focusing on, when we think about stagflation, markets are focusing on the stag and the growth concerns rather than the inflation concerns. So even if we get this higher inflation number, which is very much expected, it's not going to pull back any of the easing expectation for September.
Number 4. China's export growth in August slowed to 4.4% overall, its slowest rate since February, with exports to the United States falling 33%, although that was offset by higher exports to the rest of Asia, Europe and Africa. ANZ economist Vicky Xiaozhou is now looking ahead to November, where she says net exports could become the main drag on December quarter GDP growth.
Looking ahead, we will pay extra attention to the following events. First is the implementation of 40% transshipment tariffs from US. Second, possible tariff imposed by non-US countries on Chinese goods. Last week, Mexican president mentioned her government is considering increasing tariff on China. We cannot rule out the possibilities that China could face higher tariffs from other countries.
Number 5. Japan's GDP growth rate in the June quarter from a year ago has been revised up to 2.2% from an initial estimate for 1% growth. Here's ANZ's Head of FX Research again, Marja Benzaman, to explain why.
It came out a little bit higher than initially estimated because stronger private consumption offset weaker capital investment, which is a great thing to see, and also tells us that, if we just look at that on its own, that data does not get in the way of future BOJ normalization at all.
Majubin Zaman there. Now, in a deep dive interview, ANZ Pacific economist Kishti analyses the economic impact of the home games of Fiji's Drua rugby union teams in 2025.
Yes, Bernard, what we have done is evaluated the economic contribution of Fiji hosting Super Rugby Pacific Games for its men's and women's teams in 2025. The 2025 regular season, which finished at the end of May, generated an additional spending of about $110 million into the economy. And that is the contribution to GDP of the men's Drua as well as the women's Drua home games through the 2025 season in our view.
And could you give us a flavour of, how exciting and how popular these games are in Fiji, and also how it's a platform for some people in the rest of the world to a small flavour of Fiji?
Yes, Bernard, both the men's and women's teams are highly competitive. The women's team actually won the competition in their first season in 2022, beating the New South Wales Waratahs, which had won the 4 previous tournaments. They followed that up by defending their title in 2023. The men's team also made the playoffs in their second and third seasons, which is quite remarkable, really, given they were competing against the powerhouse clubs from both New Zealand and Australia. So both teams play a free-flowing style of rugby, which is quite pleasant to watch. Their admiration and international fan base will only grow in the future, in my view, and the Drua's team to contribution to GDP will also grow as well.
And just looking at the analysis you've done, could you tell us about what you've calculated to be the direct and indirect effects on not just spending, but GDP?
Yes. So we calculated the addition to GDP at $110 million. Now, this is just not spectators buying a ticket, food or merchandise to take in the game day experience. That's only the direct contribution, and we estimate that to be $26 million. The total contribution, however, is 4.2 times that. So I suppose the question that people would ask is, where is all this demand coming from? Well, to put an event like the Drua home games requires inputs from several other industries to make it work. And here we are talking about transport, accommodation, Drua home games do attract quite a few international visitors, retail and wholesale trade, as well as media and communications. Now, once you add the benefits that accrue to these industries, you get the indirect contribution. And this indirect contribution is quite extraordinary, really, as it is 3 times the direct impact.
And looking at the potential for further growth, there's another 7 games scheduled for 2026. But is there room for further growth here, given that the stadiums are relatively small compared to stadiums in other countries? Do you think there's room for growth?
Yes, I think the 2026 will be even bigger. Firstly, I think the games will be sellouts, given the popularity of Drua has grown so much over the recent years. And the Drua management do, in fact, sell the home games as the best game day experience that spectators could ever get by attending the games in Fiji. So going forward, I think there is scope for Fiji to really look at a purpose-built stadium, a rugby stadium, to host not only the Pacific Rugby Games, but also international games, given that Fiji is now one of the top rugby playing nations in the world.
Kishti Sen there. I'm Bernard Hickey. That was 5 and 5 with ANZ for Tuesday, September the 9th. Catch you tomorrow with business and consumer confidence news from Australia. This podcast contains general information only, not investment advice. You should obtain advice for your personal circumstances before making any investment decisions. Please view the podcast disclaimer available via your media player or email.